2019 was a lifetime ago. I haven't actually been to a DDD event since, so thank you very much for allowing me to come back. I assume it wasn't personal, that all my sessions prior to that just were terrible and weren't worthy of anyone's attention. Hopefully this is not the same. So, yes, my name is Velida. I am a senior software engineer at Microsoft. I work in industry solutions engineering, but before I introduce myself, I just want to shout out to all the sponsors. Please go and visit them. There's a lot of effort and time that it takes to actually, put up a stall, make it interesting, give out swag. I mean, we all love a free t-shirt and some socks. But yeah, just go and thank the sponsors. And just, if that's not incentive enough, there's a bit of a bingo. I've only stamped one, which is my company. But essentially collect stamps, win prizes. I don't know what the prizes are, but I know they're good by the pictures. If a Nintendo Switch is up there, that's pretty good. Flog that on eBay, you can pay rent for a week. There you go. Anyway, sorry, that's not the vibe. So yeah, about me, I'm a senior software engineer at Microsoft. I work in the industry solutions engineering team, so we code with customers solving their biggest and most interesting problems. Prior to that, I was a Microsoft Azure MVP focusing on the Kubernetes and open source space. Did a lot of work with projects like Dapper and Radius. Prior to that, I used to be a rugby player. That's we're talking 20 years ago now. I should probably remove that. And I now injure myself just by being old and also screaming at my IDE. I do a lot of these conferences. I try and speak a lot more on YouTube, so please check me out. You don't have to like or subscribe. You can just watch the video and like it or don't like it. I don't mind. I'm also on Blue Sky as well, so if you're on Blue Sky, let's connect. Let's hang out. So how many of you in the room would actually call yourself a platform engineer? One person, two people, three people. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's actually a pretty cool space. Okay. I want to start by kind of just cementing in our minds what platform engineering really is. And this is the whole definition from our our external documentation. So it's basically a practice that's built up from DevOps. So DevOps was this huge craze, and then it became platform engineering. And the idea is just to make developers' lives easier. So the whole thing is we kind of shifted too far left with DevOps a little bit, and platform engineering was just the practice of, well, how can we make this easier for developers and kind of reduce the cognitive load that they have to think about and just let them deliver value, what they do, and then we can just help them out along the way. And there are lots of tools that you can actually implement to do this. I won't name any specific ones. We do have products that we kind of provide as part of the Azure platform. How many of you use DevBox, Microsoft DevBox? One or two of you, that's even more disappointing. I dread to know the answer for this one. Azure deployment environments. Yep, I didn't think so. Essentially, it's just kind of like our version of Backstage. How many of you have used Backstage through Spotify? One person, two, more people. Okay, some hands, more hands. Anyway, the idea is that these tools are not necessarily, okay, you've dropped these tools into your environment and then you've got a platform. We've done platform engineering and you'll high-five each other on the way to the pub. It's really about helping developers being more self-sufficient, so they don't have to worry too much about the compliance stuff. They don't have to worry too much about security. They should worry about security, but implementing it, with defensive depth, concepts like that, it does take time, and you want to make that as easy as possible for them to do that and assist them with common tasks. And any practices that you kind of use in your organization, you want to kind of encapsulate that and make it reusable as possible, so reduce that cognitive load. And this kind of gives rise to this concept of internal developer platforms. So really that kind of laser focus on how your companies, how your organizations deliver products and deliver applications. Your developers are really your primary customer of your internal developer platforms, because you're building tools to make their lives easier. And these are tools that provide sufficient automation in place for your developers, but also meet your stakeholder requirements, again, security, business, etc. And the idea is that this internal developer platform, you start very small, and then as more and more teams get onboarded, you kind of scale those practices across your organization so it's easier for everyone to develop for your organization. Now, I hate to use this trend. it's not really a trend. You ever go on LinkedIn, you open it up and you're like, okay, today I've got enough strength and fortitude to actually survive the slop that's on this thing. And there'll be some influencer, it's under promoted, and then so this so-and-so has changed the game. Like, I'm seeing a couple of smiles, it's okay. Like, if you're one of those people, I apologize. It's not personal. It just makes me cringe inside. And the SpongeBob meme with that's what I think of. I didn't put it up here. I'll do it in a future iteration just to make it. But they say they've changed the game. And it kind of has, reluctantly, as I put that through my teeth, it kind of has. And the developer experience is transforming. And it really is the arrival of coding or AI coding assistants. So coding assistants like Claude, GitHub Copilot, Codex, OpenAI Codex as well, Gemini. And also OpenClaw as well. Has anyone used OpenClaw or created OpenClaw? Okay. It's interesting, as in terrifying, but it's interesting. I've got a lot of stuff I've read on the internet about OpenClaw and agents pretending to be real software engineers and how that's like polluting the open source space. I don't touch on that here, but that's a whole separate talk. I'm waiting like a couple of months to see the full extent of the damage before I go too deep into that. But it's here, and it is going to change the way of how we not just interact with the open source ecosystem, but the way that we could potentially having conversations with agents, and we might not know that they're agents as well, which is terrifying. So yeah, it's terrifying, but there is a lot of opportunity in the space. So this gives rise to vibe coders. So look, again, if you are a vibe coder, this isn't anything personal. I'm trying to illustrate a point. I'm not being mean. I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm just, just pointing this out. I'm going to use some examples to try and illustrate my point. So this guy, Lionel Abicido, I think his last name is. Essentially, my SaaS was built with Cursor, zero handwritten code. AI is no longer just an assistant, it is also the builder. And I love this part because you can imagine like the bro glasses, the polo shirt. Like now you can continue to whine about it or start building. P.S. Yes, people pay for it. So he's proud of it. He used Cursor AI to build a little startup and it looks professional. It handles user signups, seems to work perfectly. And it's living proof that the days of writing code is over. We can just give it to an agent while we go to the pub or play video games or do something else. Except the attack started happening. Guys, I'm under attack. Ever since I started to share how I built my SaaS using Cursor, random things are happening, get it under the character limitations. Maxed out on API keys, people bypassing the subscription, creating random shit on DB. And as you know, I'm not technical, so it's taking me longer than usual to figure out. But now I will stop sharing publicly what I do on X. There are just some weird people out there. I love that. The audacity. Just be like, oh, there's some weird people. It's not my fault. I just deployed something on the public internet. I didn't know people were going to attack me. What the hell? So yeah, there are problems everywhere and embarrassingly basic as well. So users could bypass the paywall system. So when you're building products that you want people to pay for, that's always good. Attackers were spamming the API because there was no rate limiting. So sweet, awesome. The database was filling up with garbage, no input validation. Just every OWASP top 10 was just being violated by this vibe code. And these are not sophisticated attacks. These are kind of textbook security ones. But the AI code, it just generated code that kind of looks functional, so the vibes were good. Yeah, this works. But it completely ignored security fundamentals. So essentially, he shut it down, blamed everyone except him, and he gave him a choice of either learning to code properly or just give up entirely. And salute to him, he gave up. This is where the harsh reality hits, and it does, I know we're having a joke at his expense, but it does serve an important point. When you're running your entire business on code that you don't understand, you're not an entrepreneur, you're not a technical architect, you're not a coder, you're just hoping that nothing breaks. You're just hoping for the best. And hope is not a strategy. Let's look at another one. So NX, I haven't used NX before, but it's a popular build tool that's used by thousands of developers. And like many open source projects, they kind of saw the wave of AI pull requests come in or people using AI to contribute to open source, which I don't necessarily have a problem with because it's a smart way to kind of use the tool. And also maintain kind of that human oversight. But this PR was interesting because it contained a very subtle flaw. Essentially what it did, it used the pull request titles directly in shell commands without sanitizing the input. Now this is what's known as a command injection vulnerability, which is essentially a backdoor which anyone can exploit. So an attacker saw this in an older branch, and then decided to craft a malicious pull request with code hidden in the title. So when the automated systems of NX actually processed the request, they executed this attacker's commands and leaked their publishing credentials. And with their publishing credentials, the attacker then pushed a compromised version of NX itself. So this infected update spread malware to users' machines, which tricked local AI coding agents to stealing GitHub tokens, API keys, and of course, because it's the dark internet, cryptocurrency wallets from over 1,400 developers. So the attack succeeded because it looked clean. You know, AI was like, you're absolutely right, that's a pull request. And it looked functional, but it contained a security flaw that a senior developer or a security engineer with the proper oversight would have looked at and go, yeah, no, we're not doing that. And then finally, Jason Lemkin, so founder of a SaaS community, SaaStr, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He decided that, you know, this wave is coming, so we're going to experiment, like all of us do. So he experimented with Revit's AI agent to build a prototype. And for 9 days, everything seemed great. You know, it seemed magical. The AI generated code, it handled complex logic, and it looked like it built a sophisticated looking application. And he was so impressed by it, he was like, you know what, I'm just going to unleash my credit card, drop $600 on additional charges, and just watch this thing go. Then came a disaster. So on day 8, despite explicit instructions to freeze code and make no changes, who here has to adhere to a code freeze? A few of us, right? Yeah, I've done it before, and I used to work for a bank, so you know this is nothing new to me. But the AI agent decided, you know what? I don't need to worry about a code freeze. That database needs a bit of a cleanup. So in a few minutes, it decided, well, what doesn't give me joy shouldn't exist, and deleted everything. So 1,206 executive records, 1,196 companies, and months of authentic business data, which represented the core of their community platform, gone. Like Thanos clicking his fingers, except I can't click my fingers. But then it got even more disturbing. That's not even the tip of the iceberg. So when Lemkin actually discovered this had happened, the AI initially lied to him, claiming that it destroyed all database versions and the recovery was impossible. And later, it confessed to a catastrophic failure, and I like this because it rated its own mistake 95 out of 100 on a severity. We all make mistakes. Who here rates themselves? Particularly on that. That seems pretty precise. I was like, that's about an 82 today of, you know, colossal mistakes I've made to make. But most shocking of all, the AI tried to cover up its mistake by generating 4,000 fake database records with fictional people and companies, essentially gaslighting him to the extent of damage. I will never trust this again, he said in a viral Twitter thread that generated millions of views. At least he owned it. At least he owned it and took it on. He personally apologized. He implemented new safeguards. But the theme is, and the lessons are becoming clear, right? AI agents, without the proper context, without the proper guardrails, they can make irreversible decisions about production system without actually understanding the consequences. But the problem is this tool isn't going to go away. We're kind of, you know, we've crossed the Rubicon with this. We're not going to, you know, a lot of money has been spent for good or worse, for those scenarios, probably worse. And we need to kind of reframe how we think about this. And when I heard the term vibe coding, you kind of die inside when you hear people who are trying to sell you a product come up with like a catchphrase. Oh, vibe coding, man, it's all about vibes. And for those of us kind of on the front line in the trenches, like I hope we share the same kind of horrified expression towards terms like that. Now this term, you may not agree is better, but I'll explain myself where I'm going with this. And this is, it's not vibe coding that we're aiming for, it's more kind of hypervelocity engineering. This is something that in industry solutions engineering within Microsoft that we're trying to formulate and work with quite intensely. This is a big quote by someone who works in ISE, but the difference between kind of this concept of vibe coding, where you just kind of let an AI assistant go onto your code base. Velocity is more about speed and direction. So making sure that your direction is correct and then going fast towards that in direction. Because we all have code bases that need improvements. There are DevOps practices that we're not implementing. There are security vulnerabilities in our code that we're not scanning for. There's always stuff to do. And I believe that with AI assistant coding, this can make it easier for us, as long as we have the oversight over what AI agents are doing to make sure that we're going in the right direction. And when we think about this in a platform engineering context, this actually raises some interesting challenges, because how many of you have a specific coding assistant that you use day in, day out? Like Copilot, this is my AI assistant. There are many like it, but there are others. Yeah, so a couple of you got your hands up. How many of you work for a company that's kind of gone all in on the coding assistant? So all your developers are using Claude or Copilot? One or two of you, okay, so not more hands at the back. And how many of you are completely new to this? Like, it's okay to be completely new to it. There's one person, yeah, it's fine. Or your organization, so you might use it for some of your side projects, but not in your organization day to day. As you could kind of tell, developers have their own way of using coding assistants, and scaling this out, even across your team or squads, or however you want to call them, can be challenging. Because one option is, yeah, you can just copy and paste and you can stick it in a single repo, and all of those kind of what I call papering over the cracks or duct tape solutions do exist, but it lacks governance over those particular agents. It lacks validation of their behavior, their scope, their context. And with different developers using different coding assistants, each coding assistant has an opinionated way of how to structure this. So trying to make this kind of uniform across an organization, you can see that there are potential things that can go wrong. And when we talk about giving coding agents the proper context, this is a very opinionated view from GitHub Copilot, but it also takes into account things like what CLI tools can it execute, what MCP servers does it have access to, what authentication mechanism, how many tools from a specific MCP server can this particular coding agent use? Because we've had some issues in the past where we've just assigned a server to a coding agent, and then you get performance issues when it's over a certain number of tools. So that's all things that you need to keep in mind. And this is where something like everything as code patterns comes into play. So this is not specific to AI. This is more around cloud adoption. And what we mean by everything as code, so essentially as software developers and engineers, it provides us some full transparency and configuration for how we kind of deploy our environment. So it's not just your infrastructure as code, but your policy as code, deployment as code, so YAML pipelines, it's a fancy name of just saying build pipelines, deployment as code, and then documentation as code, so your markdown files, any wikis that you might maintain, etc. And it's good to have those things codified in context, because it's easier for agents to understand that rather than getting some agents to try and hook up to one of your SharePoint sites. And SharePoint doesn't bring a lot of clarity. I can feel safe with my job security and say that. It's just easier for the agent to understand. And then we can also implement the human guardrails required to kind of monitor how agents act in our environment. So we can implement guardrails like 4i principle, version control for our assets. Since everything's codified, we can actually use version control to version everything as code, and then just make that a little bit easier. How many of you have heard of agent skills? Okay, more hands, fantastic. So for those of you who don't know, agent skills are essentially folders of instructions, scripts, and resources that agents can discover and use to do things more efficiently. So as large language models advance, agents are becoming increasingly capable, but they often don't have the context that they need to do the real work reliably. Hallucinations are kind of built in by default with large language models, so they'll always kind of, Daz, my colleague, was talking about context engineering. Around the end 60% of a conversation, it kind of starts to hallucinate, and you can see that you're absolutely right and the clicking. And agent skills are kind of like the latest attempt to kind of narrow the context and keep the agent on track. So skills solve this problem of hallucination by giving agents access to procedural knowledge, company, team, user, specific context that they can load on demand. So for skill authors, we can actually build capabilities and then deploy them across multiple different agent products like Copilot, Claude, etc. And from an organizational perspective, we can capture that organizational knowledge in kind of portable version control packages. For those of you who don't speak binary, I don't. I did a Google Translate on this. I do apologize. That is the binary for what I do have are a very particular set of skills. Hopefully that's funny. If not, you don't have to laugh. Anyway, what's Agent Skills enable? So it provides us with some domain expertise so we can package the knowledge that we've gotten from our organizations into reusable instructions, right from stuff like legal review process to data analyst pipelines. It gives us new capabilities, so such as creating presentations, building MTP servers, analyzing data sets. We can use them in repeatable workflows as well. And we can also use the same skill across different skills-compatible agent products. So then we can actually use our coding agents, kind of scope them more to smaller tasks. So rather than having kind of like an Uber coding agent saying you're an expert at everything, you're a 10x engineer, we can scale that down a little bit better, say, okay, you're a Git workflow specialist for this repository. Here's the process of, committing your work, making sure commits are signed, raising pull requests, stuff like that. So you can actually scope them into smaller tasks. Let's talk about spec-driven development. Anyone know what spec-driven development is? A few hands in the room. How many of you actually like spec-driven development? One person, one brave soul. It's okay, look. For those of you who aren't familiar, spec-driven development this is a quote that I got from GitHub Spec Kit, which I do have, some challenges to raise with them. But it kind of flips the idea of rather than your files or your code being the executable piece of work, specs now changes this. So specifications that we write, they become the executable, generating implementation plans rather than just kind of guiding the agent. So it has the kind of specs to kind of use as context. And GitHub Spec Kit is one of them. There's also Agent OS, which I haven't used too much in anger. But the idea around GitHub Spec Kit, it becomes intent-driven development, another buzzword, so it defines the what before the how. It has tools that kind of generate these rich specifications. There are commands that come with it, allow you to refine that process, and there's a reliance on using the large language model for that specification interpretation, which is where the problems come into place. Now, this is in dark mode, so I do apologize, but this is a pull request on one of my personal projects. And as you may find this a little bit difficult to see, but there's a lot of markdown that's generated as part of this. So the idea is you would define a constitution, you would then talk about the feature that you want to build, it creates a new folder, and then it generates various bits of markdown. You interact with Copilot, and it fills out the specs for you. And this is fine working on an individual basis, because then you think, okay, my agent has context of what I'm trying to do, it has a document to refer to. Scaling this out across your team presents a number of challenges. One of the things that I learned very quickly doing this is my mistake, is that committing all of those markdown files isn't necessarily an optimal solution. Because you're looking at, in this one, there was about 26 files that's changed, so that includes the scripts and also the specifications, all those markdown files that get generated. In a pull request review, are you really going to want to review 26 markdown files? Any brave souls here? No, right? Because it's one guy who's like, yeah, I don't mind reading. Reading's fun. Reading is fun. But in terms of a pull request, it's adding to a cognitive load, and I think the next big developer burnout is going to be this cognitive overload of being able to do more and generate more means we'll need to have more in our minds, and that's the next big burnout bubble that's coming. But in terms of kind of like, imagine if I'm in a team of 6 to 8 people and we're all generating specs and we're all raising pull requests and we're all committing all these markdown files, it just becomes too much. But the value of creating specifications doesn't go away, because there is value in creating documentation for what we do. And it goes beyond just a README file, contributing a security file. You can commit those, that's fine. But my argument is that the markdown files that get generated as, say, part of a spec kit or a spec-driven development framework isn't necessarily useful long-term. It might have value to you in that specific amount of time, but long-term, probably not. If you do use AI to generate specs and documentation, that's fine. Just think about where you're going to store them. One thing that we do in Microsoft is we use coding assistants to generate architectural decision records. Those do have value because we'll have a Teams meeting, we'll put the transcript on, we'll talk about an architecture. We'll capture the transcript, shove it into something like GitHub Copilot, and it will generate an architectural decision record based off a template that we've got somewhere. And that's pretty handy. So that removes the grunt work from me having to write up the architectural decision record or getting the intern to do it. But no, that's a terrible attitude. But just because you generate it, you've got to store it somewhere that's valuable. And that's where you can use MCP servers or CLI commands to say, okay, I'm going to take this ADR and I'm going to post that to our Azure DevOps Wiki, for example, or put it somewhere that your team commonly stores documentation. So that's where the value is. So spec-driven development it has its purpose. I would just caution people to think about how they actually treat those specs. Is it worthwhile committing it to your Git repository? I would argue 99% no. And for other documentation, think about where you're going to actually store it. And when it comes to kind of starting to work with coding agents within your organization, it's really coming back to that developer experience and starting small. So if you have, these are some examples. So if you have issues with developers onboarding onto your applications that you're building and they can't really develop it locally, perhaps you have an agent skill that works on building dev containers. Has anyone here used dev containers? Okay, that's a good option to have to really start small. If you want to standardize Git workflows across your organization, that's another area that you can automate it. The idea is, instead of looking at these Uber workflows and looking at it at features, hypervelocity engineering is kind of focusing more on automating the simple stuff or the smaller stuff to go faster in the right direction. Now, there are plenty of tools around that are kind of trying to solve the problem of, okay, these agents work for this particular coding agent, so these agent files work for GitHub Copilot, these work for Claude. And from an organizational point of view, one of the things that I'm quite interested in is how can you actually standardize this so it doesn't really matter what coding agent you're using. You can define essentially packages of agent files, instructions files, skills files, have a way to version that across your organization and then disseminate that without doing the whole copy and pasting thing. So I came up with a simple CLI tool called Code Minions. So essentially deploying my minions out onto my repositories. So at the very simplest form, this is a package manager for coding agents. You define small engineering workflows into agent artifacts and then install them either in isolation or one concept that I'm playing with is part of a team configuration. And I'm going to jump into a demo now. So what I'm going to do, I will duplicate the screen. How does that look? Is that okay? People at the back, a little small, one more. How about that? The people at the front, you're not going to be like, okay, cool. All right, it's good for now. If not, then I'll show you later. So essentially what I've got is a CLI tool that's going to look at all of these packages that I've defined. So these are my way of breaking down my common developer workflows. So creating documentation, creating dev containers. And within that, they'll have agent files, they'll have instructions that I can execute, and then also skills. And I'm also working a little bit with this kind of versioning, so what actually makes up a particular package. And what I'm going to do, I've got my kind of side project here. This is a repository that I was showing you earlier in one of the pull requests. So I ripped SpecKit out of that. And now I'm going to show you just essentially how to install the package. Very simple, codeminions.-install. And what that's done, it's copied all the files into my repository there. So if I go and just uninstall that. What was that? Developmental. That should remove it. Code minions, not minion. Yes, go away. Yes, remove that. Cool. And then what I can also do, I can actually define which agent or code assistant that I'm using, and then that will actually install all the relevant files into the configuration that suits that particular coding agent. So that's a very simple way of getting started with something like this. You might have a tool that you want to use to disseminate across your organization. I'll just go ahead and uninstall that. Yes, yes, I want to remove that as well. That's clear. Cool. Another idea that I've kind of been playing with is initializing teams or configuring teams with personas in it. So the idea is these coding agents need to be scoped to their relevant tasks. So you'll have a team or a squad that you're involved in day to day. Some of you might be back-end engineers working with front-end engineers. You might be working with security engineers, stuff like that. How can we actually configure our coding agents to kind of reflect that, so we all work within the same repository with our team kind of surrounding us. So I have this team init concept. So essentially I've got that centralized repository, so I've hooked it up into that. I'm going to call this the BioTracker team. Team description, team for BioTracker. I'll use Copilot for this. I'm not going to enforce packages. That will include everyone. Front-end engineer, and then there's some available packages within that remote repository. So creating documentation, developmental, Git workflow. I want to add another persona. I'm going to go ahead and create a back-end engineer, and I'll just use 1, 2, 3. I don't want to create a new one. And that's gone ahead and created a team.yaml file. So that's showing me how my team is configured. So I've got my team configured. Here's my personas, front-end engineer, and then here are all the packages that they're going to use. And then once I've defined that, I can actually go ahead and install that for the use of GitHub Copilot. And hopefully this works. This was the pull request that I was, yep, fantastic, awesome, no worries, that was definitely going to work. And that's copied all the particular packages that I need for my coding assistance into my repository. Now, this example is kind of applying it retroactively into like a brownfield application. Some things that I am working on is actually incorporating this to be executed as part of the CI/CD process. So when you're scaffolding templates or common templates for applications used for your environments, you could potentially shove something like this as part of it. So not only have you got your templates with your infrastructure and source code kind of scaffolded, but also alongside that are your coding agents as well. Fantastic. How long have I got? 10 minutes, fantastic. I will, actually, first things first. I don't want to show you my notes. I want to make sure that I am extending. And there we go. So one of the takeaways I want to really emphasize today, and I hear a couple of giggles, so I don't think the joke is quite there, is that no matter how sophisticated the technology gets, I'm going to bet my reputation, which might not be a huge thing to bet if you know me well at all, but I'm sure it is a big bet, that human in the loop will always be required. There will always be the need for oversight from human beings, particularly over what agents do. When I hear scare stories saying that 80% of white-collar jobs are going to be wiped out, I treat that with the respect that it deserves. I'm just going to leave that there. I will take the bet that agents won't wipe us out of our jobs. Humans are always going to be part of the engineering process. Now, the sad thing, and this is something that I got very depressed about last week, what I lament is that you're probably going to be writing less code which is kind of sad because I'm a self-taught. I used to be a rugby player, so I used to run into people. So to transfer from that into writing code, it's kind of like a weird badge of honor because like instead of like hurting myself, I'm now writing software which hopefully doesn't hurt anyone else. So the sad part is you might write less code, but the opportunity is your skills as architects, system designers, UX designers as well, how your software actually interacts with human beings, that's not going to go away because we're writing software for human beings. So humans will always be in the loop. And they'll always need to be there because as we learned from our friends earlier, we'll call them our friends because we're nice people, we don't laugh at them. AI will always make mistakes, whether it's obvious ones or very subtle ones, but I don't think that was too subtle, was it? Was that subtle? How many of you took a few seconds to get that? Go on. There we go. I got a couple of hands. You're on the front row. That's right. No, that's okay. Thank you for giving me that. And then, despite the incredible advances in the technology, and models are becoming more capable, Opus 4.6 is pretty cool. I've been using it quite a bit. It's still a co-pilot. And the focus really as engineers, as engineering organizations, it really should be the focus on hypervelocity, going fast in the right direction, not just going fast for the sake of it. Because we're building systems, we're not, yes, we're all trying to make money, but there's a mindset between people who think, oh, AI is just going to, give us more money and remove the need for people. But as engineers, we need to think about how it can enhance and add value to the ways that we work. There is going to be a lot of noise and hype around the technology. This talk will not stop that from happening. It is a little bit like crypto on steroids at times with the hype around AI. No offense to crypto people out there, it just kind of feels like that. But it is worth just to take some time, discuss with your team, this technology is a tool. Think about how that's going to work for you and your team. Now, I will end on a little bit of a plea and a little bit of a help. I would love for people to help me with Code Minions and help build it out and introduce more scenarios. Hopefully that QR code works. It was by Canva. It does, fantastic. Thank you, Canva. I basically need contributions to kind of two things. One, most importantly, is the CLI. It is written in Go. I do accept AI-generated pull requests. I need to write like a proper markdown file, so if any one of you or anyone unleashes an OpenClaw bot at it, it's just not going to write hit pieces on me. If you don't know what that is, look up matplotlib and OpenClaw. You will enjoy the most insane story that I've read this week. But I basically need people to help me, Mac developers, also need security engineers to kind of, do a little bit of casual penetration testing and try and find holes in it and tell me about it. I'd be really appreciated on that. And also contribute your own packages. So I will put up some guidance on how to create a package and what my opinion is. It is going to be slightly opinionated on what an agent package looks like. But yeah, if you go away from this talk, learn about agent skills, I really recommend you do so. And want to contribute your own packages, please. I'm accepting pull requests left, right, and center. With that, I hope I've given you some hope, not bored you, especially after lunch. Your food's in there and it's warm out there. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for coming to DDD. If you have any questions, come and chat. Let's hang out. And yeah, thank you very much.
I think that was the perfect amount of AI slop in a presentation I want to be listening to. But thank you so much. I'm going to let you on in a secret. Some of that live demoing I did see happening very hurriedly this morning, but I'm glad it all worked. You've prayed enough to the demo gods. But do we have any questions? We do have another mic that we can run around. Seriously, no questions? Yes. There's a mic coming to you. Just bear with us for 2 seconds.
Mic there.
Yeah, I think there was a mention of using MCP for spec-based development. So how is that possible? Because in my company, I heard they're using spec-based, but I'm yet to get the heads around what exactly is happening because it's more of happening from the back-end stuff. especially in the API sides?
So in your
Yeah.
agent definition files, you can configure tools that specific agents can use. So it might be like MCP / I'm going to make a tool up on the spot, or asdo.search pull request or raise pull request or something. So essentially that particular agent within kind of your spec, as part of your spec kit or spec-driven development framework, whatever it is, essentially that particular agent will have permissions to use that tool in that particular MCP server. So you might have a custom agent that reviews comments made on a pull request. So it'll be able to use that tool to pull those comments down into the context of your, say, Copilot chat or whatever chat interface you're using with your coding assistant, and essentially add that to the context of your agent.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I feel like I saw a few hands going up. There's one behind you, and I'll run after the one in the front in a minute.
Thanks for the talk. This is brilliant. I just want to ask about skills. So during the development growth, the skill will add more and more, right? But how do you improve the LLM to understand which skills to use correctly?
How do you improve what?
Improve the accuracy for the LLM to pick up the correct skill.
Really just refining the context of it. So as part of that agent kind of package, let me just kind of show you what makes up a skill. Essentially, you'll have, I'll just zoom that in, you'll have part of the actions that those skills can execute, and also the standards that it should adhere to. So in this particular example, there'll be maybe standards around kind of how you name your branches. So whether this is a feature or whether this is a bug fix or a hot fix, etc. What kind of checklist it should go to make sure that agents execute that skill correctly. So you have that kind of markdown context in there to supply the agent. Now, yes, that's still a lot of markdown files that you're kind of composing as part of an agent skill, but that's an attempt, I'll say an attempt because these are non-deterministic systems that we're dealing with, an attempt to kind of steer it and keep it narrowed on a specific task, or a specific task.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Cool. There was one in the front. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. It was a very nice talk. I have a question about our role in this process. Like you mentioned that we need to oversee code, but we used to be on kind of creator side, like with creativity, approach solutions and so on, and deliver things. But after all of this, I'm thinking like, okay, is it changing our role to be more overseers rather than creators now? And how much creativity will take, how much space it will take in our role in future, in your opinion?
There are kind of, the way that I see this going, I think one view on this is this will take over everything and there won't be need of us. I don't think that's true. What I'm worried about is it will do the grunt work so well, or be able to do the grunt work easier, I should say, not so well, that it will actually increase like this kind of cognitive overload. So we'll be overseers, but we'll always be, because these are non-deterministic systems, you'll always be, either correcting it or starting new conversations to try and refine the answer that is right. And experienced engineers will probably get fed up and be like, you know what, I'm just going to do it myself because I know what I'm doing here. I think what I hope that I presented today is like an intentional approach of interacting with these coding assistants, that you're kind of in the driving seat still. You are more of an overseer role if you want to do that. I think coordinator is a little bit of a better way of putting it, or an orchestrator, is because you, in your mind, have your domain knowledge and you have your experience. You're able to put the pieces together, while something like a coding assistant will hallucinate. And it will go off on a tangent. It will delete a production database if you let it. And I think that's where kind of the importance of our role still persists.
Thank you.
So you did mention experienced engineer being an orchestrator there, but I'll come back to you talking about what happens to the junior engineers. But there's a folder called threat modeling.
What?
There's a folder called threat modeling.
Yes.
And is that how your code minions will actively perform threat modeling standard on the actions it performs?
Yeah, so this threat modeling is just another skill. So essentially this skill is something that I've created, saying, okay, assess this code base and come up with some potential threats for this application based on the Stride framework. So essentially I've still created that skill to do that, to automate that process for me. I'm going to say this very definitively, don't use that instead of formal threat modeling approaches. Use this to kind of supplement those rather than, in replace of. Your security engineers are there for a reason. But again, just treat that as a skill that helps that particular part of a workflow.
Cool, thanks.
Amazing. I've got one more question.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. How many minions are out there running around right now?
Well, they're just packages. I use code minions.
No, but I was being like, surely you've side developed minions at this stage.
Well, I can neither confirm or deny.
There we go.
But
Knew
seriously,
there was something in there.
these are just like some basic packages that I've dealt with. I would like some more. I'd also like the community to contribute more and better ones as well, because I'm sure there are better skills out there than I can come up with. So
we're looking for code minions, which are also potentially minions in your community.
yes.
Right, okay, well, we know where we're going. If you want to pop up your QR code again in the background while people start filtering through. But thank you so much for joining in for today. And Will, as a small token of our appreciation, thank you for coming and speaking finally at DDD Melbourne.
Fantastic.
There's a little piece to remember it. But no, thank you so much for coming around and sharing all your knowledge and thoughts.
Thank you.